Okay, today I'm going to show you guys a few tips about sketching elements on your sites. So I'm just going to be doing this over top of some sketch paper. I know some of you are wondering, like, after we've taken photos and visited our sites, what types of sketches should we be doing as we keep studying? I think there's a few different things that you could really focus on as you're developing your sketching skills. One thing that I like to always think about when I'm looking at site is, what are the distinctive features? What are things that, yes, you can see them in photos, but you might want to study them more in plan or section. So, for example, a few people are working in the Mount Pleasant area or in the Southeast Falls Creek area, and there's quite a bit of overhead infrastructure. There's especially the Georgia viaducts that run over top of the street level. So I have a reference photo that I am looking at on my computer right now. You guys can't see it, but this is basically a view underneath the viaducts or viaducts. It's underneath the viaducts. And what I'm looking at is a section. Basically, it's a section, but the infrastructure kind of rises over top of my head. So even though this is a sketch, I'm still going to start with some straight lines just to sort of give myself a place to start from. Quick side note, if you guys haven't seen this kind of a pencil before, this is called a lead holder, and this is called a lead pointer. And if you want to use this, which I always do when I begin to draw, you can just extend your lead down into one of these little boxes on either side. One will give you a blunt edge, one will give you a pointed edge. And you can just use this to sharpen your lead. So you just use this little thing to get rid of the debris. So if I'm just doing a sketch section, we're not doing it in a measured view, but I think I still want to have some sort of like guidelines to work with. So if we say that our first line represents the roadway, I'm going to draw a couple lines just to sort of give myself a frame in which to work. Okay, so the general infrastructure, and I'm just going to lightly draw this in another pencil, is that we have kind of two overhead pieces of concrete that go approximately like that, and they hold up the roadway above. Essentially what I'm trying to do is take a three-dimensional image from my photograph and turn it into a more design type sketch. So I want to think about this infrastructure in terms of its sectionality. So we also have some support system that goes up like this. And then over top of that we have kind of separated roadways. I'm going to extend beyond my my frames here. Working in pencil initially is great because you can always define this further as you move on into pen or pencil, crayon, or marker or something, but now we kind of have a bit of something to start with. So next we have the concrete support beams that are running underneath. So we have one there. We have four, so one there, and one there. Same on the other side. Okay. There are some cross-sectional supports that run like this along the section. And then I would imagine up here we have some kind of a concrete deck. Probably have some surfacing on top of that. And then on the edges, there are guardrails. So let's define those a little bit more. Okay, in front of the base of this infrastructure, there's a sidewalk. And we draw this as if we're seeing it in elevation, so this is the curb height. So even though this isn't a measured section, I think it's still helpful to sort of analyze what type of infrastructure might be present on your site. So I'm going to add in a few more details. For example, I notice on my photo that there's some part of this seems to be painted, so there's some kind of a material treatment. And then also in the background, I know that there's a skate park, and if I wanted to show elevational information beyond, I might want to show something like in a dashed or dotted hidden line. So I know that there's some skating infrastructure going on behind, so I'm just going to kind of like dash in what I think it kind of looks like. If we were studying this site and the skate park was interesting to us, that might be a really important thing to show. So this is just done loosely in pencil, and what I like to do is go over my work with a thick Sharpie where I know where my section cut lines are. So we have the wood deck, or sorry, the concrete deck, those support beams, that's my section, basically. We have the ground. And now, if you want, you can go in with some technical pens. I'm going to maybe start with a 0.3 liner. And you can add in some of the line weights that you see in the background. So the line of this curb, the outline of this infrastructure. And then if you want to use the finest weight to add in some of the background details, like these lines. That's not the real line of the skate park, but let's just imagine that it is. If you wanted to, you could add a bit more detail up on this deck, just to show that there's maybe a concrete part and an asphalt part. And you could go in and keep adding details as you see them in the drawing. This is pretty good, and I think you could use this as a great reference if you wanted to talk about spatial relationships. At a certain point, you would want to discover, what is the height of this underdeck area, if that was important to your project. I think it looks like it's around about 5 meters. And then we have our curb. And if you take measurements from your site plan or Google Earth, you can discover, for example, the width of these roadways, that you can get an overall width. And this is just the kind of thing that you might want to begin sketching and looking at in your site. So major pieces of infrastructure or interesting built objects, for example, canopies, maybe transit stations or shelters, other pieces of information that are unique to your site or will have an impact on the way that you study going forward. You can add more detail to sketches like this if you want. For example, you can add shading. If you want to add more materiality, I would go in with my pencil and just do some lines to indicate this is a scored kind of brutal concrete surface. But if you wanted to use the more traditional sort of hatching approach, you could fill this in with like these little flecks, which indicate that they're made out of concrete. Usually what we see in a concrete hatch is the aggregate of the hatch. So we do these little triangular sort of chunks, and then we go in and do a bunch of little dots. Okay. If you also wanted to add a scale figure just to give a sense, I'm really bad at drawing people, so I would say if this is 5 meters and the average human is between 1.6 and 1.8, looking at a, let's see, 1, 2, 3, no, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's say eye level is probably around there. I just do these little blobs. And that's a really great beginning to drawing official sort of design sketches and thinking about things less from a perspective way and more in a design way. Okay, so I'm just going to tear that one off. You should also just label these, so I'm just going to call this Georgia Viaduct section study. Not to scale. And yes, it's important to note that on your drawings if you are not scaling them. Not so much for your academic projects, but in the future, you don't want your client to think, oh, now I can go build this viaduct.